What's happening, everybody? Justin, Bridgewater's Finest on YouTube, Blockbuster_guy on Twitter. It is 8 a.m. on Tuesday because the NHL are a bunch of dicks and they are not going to give me any time whatsoever to get some predictions done, so I gotta do them this morning because the second round starts tonight. But first, I want to get through my reaction video to all of the playoff matchups from the first round of the NHL Stanley Cup playoffs. I'll start it off by saying I was 5-3 in the first round predicting the series, so could have been better. Certainly could have been worse, but could have been better. So, you know, 5-3, I'll take it. I was 3-1 in the Eastern Conference and only an even 2-2 in the West. So the Eastern Conference is where I think we'll start. And what I'm going to do is go through the series in order that they ended. So the series that ended first is the first one that I'm going to talk about. So we're going to talk about the Eastern Conference 2 versus 7 matchup, the Ottawa Senators and the Montreal Canadiens. Ottawa, of course, as the 7th seed, defeating Montreal, which was the number 2 seed, in 5 games. So I had the incorrect team here, as I had Montreal going on to the second round. I was also -1 game. I said it was going to end in 6, and it ended in 5. Top scorers for Ottawa, Erik Karlsson and Daniel Alfredsson each had 6 points in this series. On Montreal's end, PK Subban and Thomas Plekanec each had 4 points. After the series ended, Daniel Alfredsson said in his post-game interview in Game 5 that the series was all about opportunistic goals and great goaltending, and that pretty much echoes the way that I feel about the series too. It was Ottawa really taking advantage of all of the mistakes that Montreal had, and Montreal had a lot of them. So it was Ottawa being very opportunistic on the chances that they were given, and having just phenomenal goaltending. Craig Anderson played a great series. Anderson really, aside from themselves, is the one that really beat Montreal. Montreal outshot Ottawa in 4 of the 5 games in this series, and that continued the trend throughout the season. As we mentioned in the prediction video, is that Montreal held a significant shot advantage, so they outshot Ottawa in 4 of the 5 games. And that goes back to what Alfredsson said about opportunistic goals. Ottawa, of course, outscoring Montreal 20-9 throughout the series. And no, I'm not using what I am about to say as an excuse. There were some bad calls against Montreal, and there were some non-calls against Ottawa. It's not an excuse for the outcome, because even if those calls hadn't have happened, I still think Ottawa wins this series. It's just, it was bad calls and bad luck for Montreal. Obviously, Price getting injured, and some stuff was just plain bad luck. Like the goal that was scored in I think it was game 4, in overtime on Budaj, was just not a good goal, and it's not a goal that Budaj let in throughout the season, because he played very well this year. The last thing I'll say about this, I said at the start of the season, Montreal only goes as far as Carey Price carries them, no pun intended. But Price in this series was only 1-2 with a 3.26 goals against average and an .894 save percentage, and that is simply not going to be good enough to get it done in the NHL playoffs. Unless the team in front of you is the Pittsburgh Penguins. So let's talk about the Pittsburgh Penguins. The Eastern Conference 1 versus 8 matchup. The Pittsburgh Penguins, the number 1 seed, dispatch of the quote-unquote pesky New York Islanders, which was the 8th seed. I shouldn't say that for the Islanders. The pesky team was supposedly the Senators. Pittsburgh beats the Islanders 4-2. So I had the correct team in this one, having Pittsburgh moving on. The series went 1 game further than I thought it was going to, so I thought it was going to end in 5. It ended in 6. Top scorers for the Penguins, Evgeny Malkin sits tied for 2nd in playoff scoring with 11 points. John Tavares, of course, leads the way for the Islanders with 5 points. These two teams combined for 42 goals in the 6 games. Pittsburgh got goals from 14 different goal scorers, Pascal Dupuis leading the way with 5. The Islanders got goals from 9 different goal scorers, 3 each from John Tavares and Kyle Okposo. You got to think about that. 42 goals in 6 games. Well, I mean, obviously, then, neither team was getting any goaltending, but we were really surprised by Marc-Andre Fleury, that he is maybe in a flurry of trouble. Marc-Andre Fleury in this series was 2-2 with a 3.4 goals against average and an .891 save percentage. He was relieved in, I think, game 5 by Thomas Vokoun. And all Thomas Vokoun did was go 2-0 with a 1.41 goals against and a .957 save percentage. They each had one shutout in the series, but clearly Thomas Vokoun right now is the better goaltender. I took a quick look at the defenses there too, because it blows me away that there were 42 goals scored in this series. So I looked at the D-core. Pittsburgh's D-core was actually on the plus side of the plus-minus. They were +6 as a unit. Obviously, Pittsburgh, quote-unquote, won the defensive battle there, even though it's a series where 42 goals were scored in 6 games. Pittsburgh has a ridiculous 7 players on their roster in the first round that averaged a point a game. And that is just unreal. So Pittsburgh moves on. Pittsburgh versus Ottawa is your second round matchup out of those 2 series. Now we still have left the 3v6 and the 4v5 matchup, and technically while the 4v5 matchup ended earlier, I want to talk about 3v6, which was the number 3 seed Washington Capitals and the number 6 seed New York Rangers. The reason I want to address them first is I was perfect in this series. I correctly predicted the New York Rangers to beat the Washington Capitals in 7 games, which is what ended up happening. Henrik Lundqvist, of course, coming up huge in those last 2 games. Top scorers, Derek Brassard came out of nowhere for the Rangers to score 9 points in this 7-game series. For Washington, Green, Perreault, and Ward each had 4 points. Green, Perreault, and Ward. None of those names are Alexander Ovechkin. Apparently Ovechkin decided he wanted to be a grinder in this series because he decided to throw a bunch of hits around but really not get as involved in the offense as he possibly could. Now, yes, I want to give the Rangers credit here because the Rangers put Callahan and McDonough and like their best shot-blocking, grinding defensive players and plastered them to Ovechkin all series. So I have to give the Rangers credit there too, but Ovechkin, aside from throwing his hits, which yes, they looked very nice, he just was not effective in this series, and it's partly to the credit of the Rangers players, but it's partly to the detriment of Ovechkin himself. 2 points in a 7-game series for Alexander Ovechkin, for a guy that in all likelihood is going to win the Hart Trophy. A -2 rating. That, to me, is also just crazy, because that means not only is Ovechkin not scoring, his line mates aren't scoring either. He did have 30 shots, which ties him for 3rd in the playoffs, but clearly, in this series, he was not dangerous enough to produce. Alexander Ovechkin was outscored in this series by Derek Brassard, Mats Zuccarello, Carl Hagelin, Taylor Pyatt. Good God, do I have to go on anymore. A lot of people are surprised that the Rangers won this series. The Capitals outshot the Rangers by about 3 shots a game, outshot them by 21, and they did have a slight face-off edge as well, but the Rangers badly outhit the Capitals, and not only did they badly outhit them, they outblocked them, and the Capitals were way too undisciplined. They took way too many penalties. Now, luckily for them, the Rangers' power play was dog shit in this series, and I hope they work on that. And Henrik Lundqvist, as we said before, is still the king. A 1.65 series goals against average, .947 save percentage, and back-to-back shutouts with the Rangers' backs against the wall. Henrik Lundqvist stole this series, especially in Game 6. And I mentioned earlier about the blocked shots. The Rangers outblocked Washington 161 to 130 in this series. Now, Washington did a damn good job of blocking shots in their own right. 130 in a 7-game series. That's nothing to sneeze at. That's almost 20 a game. But the Rangers lead the playoffs in blocked shots with 161. And blocked shots were 29 to 7 for the Rangers in Game 7. And that was a big determinant there. They really, in a Game 7, really sold out, really proved that they wanted to win it, and Washington just folded. So the Rangers move on in the upset. I'm the one that predicted it. Remember where you heard it. Now we're going to talk about 4 versus 5. Toronto and Boston. One of the greatest ebbs and flows in a series that I think you've ever seen in the history of the NHL. Not just the ebb and flow of the series, but the ebb and flow of Game 7 itself. is something that, as a hockey fan, I just don't think I've ever seen before. The Boston Bruins defeat the Toronto Maple Leafs Game 7 overtime. Top scorers for Boston, David Krejci leads the playoffs with 13 points. James Van Riemsdyk, JVR, led the way for the Leafs with 7 points. We talked about the crazy ebb and flow of this series. Boston took a 3-1 series lead into Game 5. And once Game 5 hit, James Reimer just took the team on his back for the Maple Leafs and willed this thing to go to Game 7. So from a 3-1 series lead, it ends up 3-3. Game 7 in Boston. Toronto jumps out to a 4-1 lead in Game 7. It looks like all is lost for the Bruins. There's about 8 minutes left in the third period. 4-2. Less than 3 minutes left. 4-3. Last minute of the game. 4-4. Forcing overtime. Patrice Bergeron in overtime wins it. Boston goes nuts. And this is just proof of what a great guy James Reimer is, because even after that goal was let in, the last goal, the overtime goal, and he's laying there on the ice, the camera pans to him, and under his mask, he's got a smile on his face. What can you do? What can you do? You got to smile, you got to laugh at it, at least a little bit. There's no point in getting mad over it. The puck's in the net, the game's over. Reimer is just one of many Leafs players that deserved better in this series. Reimer most of all, based on the way that he played in Games 5 and 6, but Nazem Kadri deserved better. JVR, Van Riemsdyk deserved better. Phil Kessel deserved better, even though Kessel really had a good coming-out series here against his former team. Cody Franzen with 2 goals in Game 7 deserved better. Jake Gardiner, who was a defensive playmaker all series, deserved better. Reimer most of all. He had a 2.88 goals against average through the whole series, which is not spectacular, but he had a .923 save percentage, and when you look at Games 5 and 6, when Toronto's backs were really against the wall there, he stopped 72 of 74 shots in those 2 games, and he demanded that there would be a Game 7. I will say this about Boston, because Boston was very lucky. They got through on the back of Krejci, Bergeron, and Lucic, and Tuukka Rask. That's the reason that they got through. Boston will have no chance next round unless the coaching staff and the rest of the players grab Brad Marchand, Jaromir Jagr. Like, Jagr's the elder statesman of this team and was dogging it real bad in Game 7. And Tyler Seguin, who completely disappeared in this series. If they don't grab these guys by the scruff of the neck and say, get your shit together, Boston has no chance next round. It's going to be the number 4 Boston Bruins versus the number 6 New York Rangers in the second round. Let's move on to the Western Conference now, where the only Canadian team in the Western Conference to make the playoffs also happened to be the only team to get swept right out of town in the first round. So the disappointment continues for Canadian hockey fans. The 3v6 matchup, the number 6 ranked San Jose Sharks just boot the Vancouver Canucks at the number 3 seed clean out of the playoffs in a 4-game sweep. And I could not have got this series more wrong. I had Vancouver actually winning this in 7 games, so I had the incorrect team, and I missed it by 3 full games, which is as bad as you can do predicting actual games. Top scorers in this series, Pavelski and Couture for San Jose, each had 8 points in this series. You look at Vancouver, Alex Burrows, and the 2 Sedins, each had only 3 points in this series. Aside from the physical play, where Vancouver out-hit San Jose by a good clip, 146-107 in the series, the Sharks outplayed the Canucks in virtually every other aspect of the game. They outscored them 15-8 in the series. They outshot them 146-126. They outface-offed them 160-125. They outblocked them 80-55, and they were much more disciplined. San Jose had 24 power plays in a 4-game series. Vancouver had just 10. Vancouver completely lacks confidence in a couple of things, but worst of all, they completely lack confidence in their goaltending situation. So Corey Schneider can't start this series. So Bobby Lou, Roberto Luongo, plays games 1 and 2. Vancouver didn't lose games 1 and 2 because of Roberto Luongo. Luongo actually played well. So Schneider comes back, and they reward Luongo for the fact that he played those 2 games pretty well by putting Schneider back in. I don't get it. I don't know why you wouldn't, even when Schneider was ready to go. He's cold. He's cold. He hasn't played the first 2 games. Why would you not put Luongo in again in Game 3? I say you put Luongo back in. He hasn't played himself out of that position. I don't know. I thought it was a bad move. I thought it was a bad coaching decision. I just thought it was bad. I thought it was dumb. You take a look at the Sharks. The Sharks had some mad balance on scoring. You had 3 players on the team that had at least 3 goals, and 5 players who averaged a point a game in this series. So they got scoring all around. Obviously, Pavelski and Couture up at the top. Here's my question for you. Is it time to blow up the Canucks? Is it time to trade Luongo? I mean, Luongo's going to get traded. There's no ifs, ands, or buts about it. If he doesn't get traded, I wouldn't be surprised if he walked. But is it time to trade the Sedins? Because there's a whole lot of value in one or both of the Sedin twins. What is Vancouver's biggest area of need? What do you guys think? Maybe is it just a matter of needing 1 or 2 little things and you don't have to blow the whole thing up yet? I want to hear your opinion on the Vancouver Canucks. To the surprise of no one in the 1 versus 8 matchup, the number 1 ranked Chicago Blackhawks, the President's Trophy winning Blackhawks, dispatched of the number 8 seed Minnesota Wild in 5 games. Now, I honestly thought that this was going to be a sweep, so I said 4 games. It went 5. That's okay. Top scorers, of course, Patrick Sharp and Marian Hossa, surprisingly enough, actually. Both had 6 points. You would have expected to see maybe Taves or Patrick Kane's name there, but Sharp and Hossa leads the way with 6 points each. For Minnesota, Matt Cullen led the way with 3 points. Take a look at Minnesota's top scorers from the regular season. You're talking Zach Parise, Mikko Koivu, Ryan Suter, David Setaguchi, Matt Cullen, as we mentioned before, Pierre-Marc Bouchard. They combined for only 7 points in this series and a minus 17 rating. Corey Crawford was solid when he needed to be. He faced a decent amount of shots. He faced around 28 shots a game, not a lot of which I would describe as overly dangerous. But Crawford was solid when he needed to be. He's got a 1.32 goals against average and a .950 save percentage, so how can you argue with it, right? As I said, I don't really think a lot of the shots were dangerous, but he was there when he needed to be. There were 15 skaters on Chicago's side that registered at least 1 point in this series, which is pretty damn good. Patrick Sharp, I just want to highlight Patrick Sharp because not only did he co-lead the series in points, he led the series in goals and led the series in shots. So Patrick Sharp was really the offensive catalyst that ran that machine. To me, Chicago proved beyond a shadow of a doubt why they are the class of not only the Western Conference, but of the NHL, and it's going to be very interesting to see what they do next round. The 4 versus 5 matchup saw the Los Angeles Kings as the number 5 seed defeat the number 4 seeded St. Louis Blues for the 2nd straight playoff season, beating them 4 games to 2. Now, I picked the correct team here in the Los Angeles Kings. I did honestly think that this was going to go to 7 games, so I was -1 on the series prediction there, but that's okay. Mike Richards leads the way for Los Angeles with 5 points in this series. For St. Louis, Alexander Steen, David Backes, and Vladimir Sobotka each had 3 points each. Each had 3 points each? Nice. Now, I said in the prediction video, it can't get any closer than this series, at least by the numbers. Every game in this series was decided by 1 goal, so can't get any closer than that. And 3 goals or more were only scored in this series 3 times in 12 chances between the 2 teams. Obviously, 6 games for each team. So 12 opportunities and only 3 times were there 3 goals or more We figured this series was going to be about defense and goaltending, and we had some dueling tenders in this series. Both Jonathan Quick and Brian Elliott had a sub 2.00 goals against average and a save percentage above .915. So it was definitely a matchup of two dueling goaltenders. Jonathan Quick had a .944 save percentage in this series, so really living up to the reputation that he built in last year's playoffs. Kings are going to be damn tough to beat at home, which is kind of the inverse of what it was last year, because last year they were real road warriors. But the Kings have won 10 straight games at home, and if you go all the way back to last year's playoffs, are 9-3 at home in the playoffs. A little bit of food for thought for you, and I'll leave you with this about this series. A number 5 seed has not made a Stanley Cup final since all the way back in 1995. That was the New Jersey Devils. But the Devils did win the Cup that year. Final series in the Western Conference saw another upset. We saw the number 7 seeded Detroit Red Wings knock off the number 2 seed Anaheim Ducks. The series went to 7 games, and I don't know, the Red Wings earned it to me. I mean, I thought the Red Wings definitely earned it. Now, I had the incorrect team here. I thought Anaheim was going to go through. I also undershot it by 2 games. I thought Anaheim would win it in 5. Top scorers for Detroit, Henrik Zetterberg, team captain, leads the way with 8 points. For Anaheim, Ryan Getzlaf and Francois Beauchemin on the back end each had 6 points in the series. Detroit was not only outscored in this series 21-18, they were also outshot in the series 225-218. But they showed their mettle. They showed all the playoff experience that team still has on its roster, and they proved their mettle. They were just tougher. Obviously, one of the big storylines here, Corey Perry's power outage. Like, Corey Perry just disappeared from this series completely, kind of like Tyler Seguin in the Boston series. So, I mean, you had 7 games played. You did not score a goal. This is for a guy that, correct me if I'm wrong, has won a Rocket Richard trophy, and he scored 0 goals. Only 2 assists, so only 2 points in the series, and he only had an even rating, despite the fact that he had 24 shots on goal in the series and over 20 minutes of ice time on average. That's inexcusable to me in the playoffs. I don't know what's going on with Corey Perry, but it's inexcusable, and I would argue that it ended up costing the Ducks the series. Anaheim didn't lose the series because they weren't good enough, because they were good enough to win this series. They lost the series because Detroit, well, first played the role of cardiac kids. 3 of their 4 wins came in overtime, and they rode a hot goaltender late in the series. If you look at games 4 through 7, so really like the deciding chunk of this series, and you look at Jimmy Howard, goaltender for the Red Wings, he stopped 127 of 137 shots, had a .927 save percentage, and made at least 31 saves in every game through 4, 5, 6, and 7. So Jimmy Howard took the Red Wings on his back, and they used that playoff experience that they have, and they were just the better team. Anaheim can still hold their heads up high. Again, it wasn't that they lost the series because they weren't good enough. They lost the series because of Corey Perry. So that's it for the reaction to the first round matchups. Again, I was 5-3. I really enjoyed the first round, aside from Montreal totally disappearing. I was surprised by San Jose, surprised by Detroit for sure, happily surprised there. Nothing against Anaheim, but I always like seeing the underdog, so to take it. Impressed by the Rangers, but I thought that was going to happen, so really, I was impressed by the Islanders putting up a 6-game fight against Pittsburgh. But I really enjoyed the first round. I cannot wait for the second round. Prediction video is coming your way later today. Second round starts tonight. That's it for me for now. Justin, Bridgewater's Finest on YouTube, Blockbuster_guy on Twitter. Please, God, let me go back to sleep.